Let's turn over to chapter 29. I'm not sure how many of these we'll get through tonight, but they're all very interesting when you look at life through God's lenses. Genesis 29:32 tells us that a lack of love qualifies as an affliction. It says in verse 32, Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my, there it is, affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. God considered Jacob's lack of love for Leah to be her affliction. After Jacob labored for 7 years to earn Laban's permission to marry Rachel, the pretty and well-favored daughter, he was tricked by Laban, who gave him Leah instead, the older and less favored daughter. Jacob never wanted Leah as his wife, so when he had to work another 7 years to marry the one whom he really loved, that lack of love carried into the marriage. You all know the story. Just as it wasn't right for Hagar to be mistreated by her mistress, it wasn't right for Leah to be unloved by her husband. God said, I see your affliction, Leah. Your husband should love and cleave to you, and I want you to know I care about your suffering. Now, that's something we can relate to. God says, I feel. Politicians do that. They try and empathize. God says, I'm the one that can empathize. I feel. I can relate to that. And we should ask ourselves, do we have a lack of love in some relationship? Are we experiencing an undeserved lack of love simply because of not being liked by that person? That's an affliction, and God wants to teach us some great things through that suffering. Now, what did He teach Leah? She got to have the six sons. She was the star. Back then, having a son for a man was the ultimate. And she didn't have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. She had 6. She was blessed. God looked upon her. She had His firstborn and 5 others. A lack of love qualifies as an affliction in God's eyes. God sees when we're mistreated, like Hagar. God sees when Leah didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't her fault. Her dad put her in that marriage. Her dad snuck her in that tent. Her dad put the veil on her and made Jacob think it was Rachel. She didn't have anything to do with it. So what was she supposed to do? She's supposed to trust the Lord. And look, He blessed her greatly. Keep going across the page to Genesis 31. Here's another fascinating one. Lost wages and broken promises also qualifies as an affliction in God's sight. It says, Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban in verse 36. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Now skip down to verse 41. I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock. You've changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. Now look at this. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Lost wages and broken promises qualify as an affliction that God can work with. God viewed Jacob's lost wages and Laban's broken promises to him as an affliction. A modern-day example of such a trial is the plight of so many American workers who suffer because of the downsizing of large companies to which they've given the best years of their lives. In an effort to save money, the oldest employees are usually let go first, so the company doesn't have to pay retirement benefits and they can replace them with a lower-priced worker. All the while, if you read the newspapers, they're all garnering multi-million-dollar bonuses. Now, we're not supposed to go out and break the windows and start the factories on fire. What we're supposed to do is allow God to do something in us through the affliction. See, the Lord is going to right all wrongs. We don't have to. It's far more precious to learn a lesson that only God can teach us in the school of affliction than to fight it. And I met one man, my first pastorate, so you would have no idea who it was. It was 30 years ago. And his company, a multinational, huge multi-billion-dollar company, did something wrong. And he fought them. When I met him, he was in his 60s. That happened when he was in his 30s, and he was still fighting them. You know what? He looked 80. He should have been suntanned and on the golf course about 62. He looked 80, and his stress level and ulcers and all the, I don't know the pills he had to take, but it was unbelievable because he was going to get back at that company. And you know, God says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I'll recompense. I'll repay. Do you know what the blessing would have been if at 30 he would have said, Lord, I want to be like Jacob. God says if I endure such a hardship, God knows about my lost wages. He knows about the company's broken promises, and I intend to work out my perfect plan for your life through that affliction. God says your job situation is a part of the affliction that I have promised to use for your good, no matter how long it may take. If you will trust me, I, God says, will work it out for good. That friend of mine never trusted the Lord in that part of his life. And for years I got the bulletins from that church. And I finally saw he was gone. And I thought, did he go to his grave embittered against that company? Why didn't he step back? Why didn't he release God to take care of them? You see, when we are vengeful and bitter, it withholds and restrains God from doing what he wants to do. And God can do a much better job getting even than we can. You know, it's kind of like if I went out and tried to fight a war with my BB gun, or we could let, the Joint Chiefs of Staff guy put one of those, new high, super duper, high energy explosives. I mean, which one do you think will get more done? It's God that says, I'll recompense. Lost wages, broken promises, lack of love, ill treatment. God says, leave it in my hands.